to our Inspiring Women in Science podcast series. I'm your host, Sonobaim Husseinzadeh, the chairperson of Women Engineering at IEEE Azerbaijan. We are excited to announce the release of our new podcast featuring inspiring interviews with women. In our first episode, we chat with Alessandra Sciutti, head of the contact unit at the Italian Institute of Technology. In our interview, Alessandra talks about her journey in engineering, the challenges she's faced, and her advice for young women who are interested in pursuing a career in STEM. Wish you good time by listening to the podcast.
Would you like to tell about yourself, introduce briefly?
So, hi everybody, I'm Alessandra Sciutti and I lead the contact unit at the Italian Institute of Technology, which is a unit that deals on cognitive robotics with a particular focus on interaction. So our ambition is to actually use robots to better understand human cognition, and through this understanding develop models that we can in turn implement on our technologies to make our technology is actually better at interacting with us.
That's quite impressive. Did you always know what you would like to do in your life? Like, did you think that you would like to choose this project?
Absolutely not. So actually, I studied classical studies until high school. And when I finished high school, I was evaluating the possibilities to go ahead with classical studies, study ancient Greek, that I liked very much. But then I was uncertain between that and bioengineering, so a very different field. And I opted for engineering in the end, actually, out of a consideration also of opportunities in terms of work after study. So I started bioengineering and in Genoa, where there was the possibility to do also neuroengineering, which was, let's say, a novel specialization that was dedicated at modeling and understanding how the brain works. And that was what actually triggered my interest a lot. It was already a bit oriented toward research and the idea of investigating how our brain functions. And there I met my mentor, Professor Giulio Sandini, who was teaching there a course on humanoid robotics, so intelligent system, and in particular, and he proposed this idea to all the class that maybe to understand the brain, you could also use an approach, a synthetic approach of learning by building. And in such a kind of adventure, building a humanoid robot could actually help our understanding. So that's where I started knowing a bit about robotics, and that became my road, my path.
What was the maybe first challenges you faced when you started in the field of the robotics?
Well, I think that I was coming from a different field, and even nowadays I'm a very, let's say, multidisciplinary in some sense background, and this is a pro and a contra. So on the one hand, it gives you different perspectives and the possibility to talk with experts coming from different fields, and maybe not understand everything, but having like the right mindset or the open ear to start a discussion that is fruitful. On the other hand, especially growing up, not having a very precise identity, sometimes it's a challenge because you are not, you don't know yet how to identify yourself with a single or specific group. And that throughout my career was sometimes a strength, sometimes a weakness.
See, when you mentioned that it was a struggle when we are younger, it's hard to identify yourself which path you would like to choose. And how did you, what was your experience about it? How did you solve it? Let's say it like that.
Well, let's say at the beginning, I always leveraged a lot on the help of my peers and on the suggestion also of more expert people. So I always collected a lot of suggestions before making a decision. an undecided person on average. But in the end, I actually followed my passion. So I became passionate for something. I started discovering it. I started getting in touch also maybe with different topics during my life. But then I fell in love with them. At that moment, the decision was taken already. So, I mean, and for me, that worked. I don't know if it's a general recipe, but for me, then following my passion really paid out, because now when I go to work, I'm happy.
I'm glad to hear that. How would you define passion?
Well, that's a difficult.
For yourself, like,
but for me, it means having a question in your head, and every now and then randomly coming back to that, and then looking around in your everyday life, but also at conferences, and starting finding, oh, but this is connected to that. Oh, but this might help toward that. So really, without the necessity to, oh no, I have to think about that, but really saying that this topics, this question is something that that makes you wonder all the time.
Right. Would you like to talk about how your experience with the research shaped your vision, your thoughts about your field?
Well, I think it is so important where you grow up. So at least for me, it was very important. I spent my postdoc actually still at the Italian Institute of Technology, where I did my PhD. And there was a very large department that it was very multidisciplinary. So at that time, I had the possibility to learn also the basics of psychophysics and experimental psychology. This opened to me like a new world. And also working shoulder to shoulder with people with very different background and somehow very different methods and interests, to me really reshaped a bit the way I addressed problems coming from a different field. So that was one first step. Then I had the opportunity to work abroad a bit. So I was in US for 1 year. I was in Japan for a few months. And that again gave me insights on how it is possible to do maybe even the same research or address the same research question in very, very different manners. And, to take inspiration of what I found particularly good or what I didn't like about all these different experiences. So when I came back and when I started my own unit, I somehow all these scenes that I had collected during my past experience shaped the way, both the way I conduct my research now and the way I coordinate, let's say, the activities of the researchers that work with me.
Right. Do you think intercultural experience and working with different people from different cultures is very important to get this insight?
Definitely. So I think that that's a very, very great richness. And in particular for the field I'm working in, which is robotics, but robotics for interaction. So where you focus on cognition and you focus also on social cognition and interaction. So when you are targeting humans up to a certain point, you can't go ahead if you don't have a diverse group really sharing their thoughts, their vision, and as far as their perspective are, the better. And this entails variation in seniority, in gender, and the difference in culture is so greatly important. It really enriches the discussion so much.
What would be a cultural shock for you when you came, for example, to Japan or US and said, oh, we are doing it completely differently?
Well, I'm a chatty person, as you might gather from this discussion. So I love to chat, and in that I'm very Italian. So I move a lot my hands, and Also, at work, we talk a lot, we take our poses and we discuss, and we also do informal discussion often. So I just pass by to someone and say, about that topic we were discussing. So let's chat a bit about that. When I was in Japan, even though it was an international laboratory I was hosted in, still it was a totally different atmosphere. Everybody was very silent. It was just a high or very courteous kind of welcoming, but there was not this informal chat. There was absolutely no chaos. So for me, that was a cultural shock.
Did you notice it also within the study of the human-computer interaction with the robots, specifically when I think you conduct a study with the different type of people, and did you also notice that on this cultural differences?
We tried that. We have a study in which, since in that laboratory, in our laboratory, we have exactly the same robotic platform, we wanted to do an intercultural study in which we replicated the very same paradigm in the two laboratories, one in Genoa and one in Osaka, Japan. And our question was exactly, will be the interaction different? And we were studying, however, a very low-level phenomenon, which is the automatic imitation of speed, a phenomenon that is mediated by a system which is similar to, let's say, mediated by the neuron system. And it's a sort of phenomenon by which if I start moving faster, you start moving faster. We have studied that in human-robot interaction as well, and we have seen that this occurs also with humanoid robots if the robot move according to biological motion. So our question was, okay, but how does this changes by as a function of top-down influences like culture could be? Because of course the rapport that in Italy and Japan exists in everyday life with robots is so different, and but we failed to find a significant difference. So we found out that at the level of these basic pro-social mechanisms, the two populations revealed very, very similar effects, which suggests us that of course, at the level of culture, there are incredible differences, even in behavior. Like if we study how we use gaze when we are interacting, Japan and Italy are two separate words. But the very, very low level, instead, it seems that the mechanisms are much, much more similar.
I think that's quite interesting.
Yes.
Because I'm also in this field, human-computer interaction, robot interaction. Okay. After interview, I will show my robot we are working here. So we did the similar, mostly about the empathy and emotional interactions, and with Germany and Japan. Okay. There's a huge difference. Japanese people, they are treating humanoid robot as a companion, as a person. But German older, it's specifically older adults. It's they are treating more like assistant, asking some questions. Or what is that? What is this? Which is very surprising and interesting how people see the one object differently.
Yeah. No, that's super interesting. Also, I mean, it's quite fascinating how, let's say, whereas we are all humans, so there are some regularities that probably are common to just the human being as animal. When you start thinking of how the culture reshapes our consideration of the robot, of our perception of the robot, of its role in the society, then you see this enormous difference emerge. So that's pretty interesting. It's a pretty interesting field as well.
Yeah, it is actually. Could you please talk about your project? I read about Whisper.
Yes.
What was it about, and how did you start, and what was your goals about this project?
Yes, so the project is about, so the title is Investigating Human Shared Perception with Robots. The basic idea is that when we build a machine, like a robot, we tend to make its sensor as accurate as possible, like taking perfect pictures or audioscapes of what the environment is. Because we assume that also humans do that they perceive the world accurately. But if we study how our brain works, we realize that that's absolutely not the case. So our perception is not an accurate reproduction of the world. Our brain instead transforms our perception. So it takes information from the senses, but then it modifies them, enriches them using prior knowledge. And this is something that optimizes, facilitates our survival. So it's something that the brain does for our good. But it means that sometimes we perceive things that are very different from the actual world. And this happens all the time, but we realize only when there are failures, like in the case of optical illusions. And one particular case in which it is our prior experience that really reshapes our perception is about perception of time, of space, and the perception of actions of others. These are things that we don't perceive accurately, but we perceive better in some sense than accurately, because we can anticipate, we can predict, something that our machines are not as good as us doing. So the entire project focuses on understanding these biases, so measuring in the human how our brain changes our perception, and then modeling the same biases into the robot. Not so that the robot perceives wrong, but so that the robot knows how the human perceives. This way, the robot can coordinate in time better, coordinate in space better, and start getting an understanding of the action of others as good as the ones that humans have, because we are super good at understanding the state of someone else or the intention of someone else just by looking at their actions. And so the entire project is about this double phase. So understanding human biases, implementing them onto the robot and model so that they can gain a shared perception, so that they can see the words through the same, let's say, perspective.
But isn't it the biases of persons strongly depends on their cultural background, their surroundings? There's many factors about why a person might perceive differently.
Definitely. Well, there are different levels of biases. So we have both cognitive biases, like about what we decide to remember, what we decide to forget, what we decide to believe, what we decide to trust. So these are cognitive biases, and they often have a very strong cultural dependence, because they really depend on the surrounding, on the environment, on the cultural belief. And then there are perceptual biases. These perceptual biases are phenomena by which, for instance, we tend to shorten our perception of an interval of time as a function of the interval of time that we have just perceived. And the same occurs for estimating the length of a line or perceiving the duration of an action. These are instead strongly related to how our brain and sensory motor system are built. And these are much, much more robust to cultural differences. So these really depend on your immediate past history rather than on the way or where you grew up. And we are addressing a little both. So with a stronger focus on the perceptual biases, which is our first topic, but we have also studied a bit phenomena related on trust, on compliance, which pertains to the cognitive biases domain.
That's quite fascinating project.
Yes, I like it very much.
Quite challenging. I see where there's a lot of many challenges in that possible challenge. And when you face this kind of barriers or more challenges, how do you what is your approach usually?
Usually is with a little help of my friends. So kidding aside, I do believe that research cannot be a one-man kind of effort. It's really something that you need to do together. And I'm super lucky because I have this wonderful team of people, of researchers at different, let's say, levels, and they are all very helpful. But not only, they bring in novel ideas, novel proposals that pertain to this general big question, but address it in a novel way, and this enriches the work incredibly. So this was, I would say that when the biggest challenges arise, having the possibility to confront yourself with your peers, with your collaborators, and also with mentors is always a very, very helpful path away from the problems.
So teamwork is quite crucial.
Yeah. For me, it is.
What kind of team player you are? Like, what do you do in team?
Well, at the moment, by construction, I'm leading the team. So I have more or less to coordinate the activities and to plan ahead which are the general goal, and to organize both the planning and the execution of the different overall goals, if you want. In general, that's a good question. How a team player? Since I love to work in teams, I tend to avoid confrontation. So if it's possible to help, and if it's possible to debate, that's okay. If it's a moment to really argue, that's the part that I like the least. Sometimes it happens, but it's if we can find a compromise or a trade-off, I generally prefer, let's say.
What is important for you in team? What is good team for you?
For me, a good team is a team where everyone can feel realized. So in which there is not utilitarianism approach. So where you serve as a tool for someone else because you have certain competence. Rather, I like very much the idea that maybe you have this expertise and you are available to provide it, but at the same time, you can always count on anybody else to provide their help when it's needed. So, for me, a good team is one team where each individual, anyway, can pursue its own goals, and this is still harmonically organized within the team.
How do you